Time again for another installment of The Basics, and on today's show I want to get back to Magic the Gathering because I want to start talking about some of the expansions that came out, and specifically today I want to talk about Mirage. And Mirage had definite pros and cons, and it was a very annoying expansion because of what could have been. So stick with me and I'll explain what I'm talking about. Now, Mirage came out in October of 1996, and there was a lot of hype for this expansion well before it came out. We're going almost a year back. And you saw spots pop up in both of the main CCG magazines at the time, being Scry and Inquest. There was a lot of talk at the comic and card stores that sold Magic the Gathering and other CCGs. Friends of mine that played Magic before me in high school and other kids that were playing were talking about it, and even though I didn't get into Magic until 1997 and started to buy at that time, a lot of my first cards in my first collection were from Mirage because they were easy to come by. I got them through trades, or I managed to buy booster packs of my own at card shops with either my allowance or any money I got from family at the time. So needless to say, when I got into it, most of my collection at that time was Mirage. And it was a great expansion to a certain point because it has pros and cons, but it also annoyed a lot of hardcore Magic players. A lot of the great cards notwithstanding, like it gave white some better cards and power cards, things to destroy artifacts and enchantments, life gains. It gave better cards for blue with lower costs to bring out, even some better creatures. It didn't do a lot for black except maybe some enhancements, which were necessary, so they were good to see. It gave red even more power and more creatures to play with, and I remember my first red deck was just brutally awesome thanks to some of the Mirage cards. We got some high-powered creatures for green, like Canopy Dragon, which was a 4/4, Stalking Tiger, cannot be blocked by more than one creature, starts as a 3/3, and it gave us Crash of Rhinos with Trample, which was an 8/4. That was huge. It also gave us some great artifact cards like Charcoal Diamond. But as good as Mirage was in terms of the cards, it also did something nasty, and to use these dice to illustrate, it gave us counters. Way too many cards with counters that we had to keep track of. And this is what really started Magic as a whole going into counters. And I don't want to get into it too much on this show, but if you remember Portal, that did it even worse. So it was tough to have all these good cards, and a lot of these cards I incorporated at my deck at the time into different color decks. I even use some of them to this day because especially some of the green cards and the creatures, they are just strictly awesome. But the amount of counters that came out in Mirage, I remember going to a tournament. I didn't play in one. It was a local tournament held by a card shop, and there were a lot of players getting confused at keeping track of all the counters because it was hard to keep up with at the very beginning. And a lot of my friends that played Magic in high school in the cafeteria at lunch had the same problem. And when I got into Magic in 97 and started accruing my first collection of dice, when I saw some of the counters on the Mirage cards, wow, I got a headache. So Magic could have done better with Mirage. They really dropped the ball to go from a lot of these cool cards to help out colors, and then counters. Lots and lots of unnecessary counters. Now, that all being said, Mirage was still a decent expansion as far as expansions go. If I had to rate it out of 10, 1 being the lowest, 10 being the highest, it's tough. I would give it between a 6.5 and a 7. And that is hinging on the amount of counters that they introduced. They'll still drive me crazy to this day. As much as I like using some of these cards, I will not touch any of the cards from Mirage to this day with counters, and even in Portal too, because they make the game an unnecessary mess at a time when it didn't need that. Mirage could have been streamlined a lot better than it was, but que sera, sera. That's all. Have a great day, everybody.